In the last episode, we talked about the many similarities between the film scenes from the beginning of The Fellowship of the Ring and the book, but in this episode we slowly come to the parts that are very different in the books, even though I will cover the biggest differences that are not in the films in the next few episodes. For those who just found this video, in this series I go through the extended edition of the Lord of the Rings films bit by bit and try to explain every lore reference and every difference to the books in detail. This is episode 4 and we haven't left the Shire yet, so you get an idea of what I mean with in detail. Feel free to check the previous episodes too. This one will be a bit shorter. I explain why in the outro section at the end. As always, I try to pronounce names as Tolkien described it, but let's start. Last episode we stopped shortly after the Green Dragon Inn scene, which is only in the extended edition. While doing research I noticed that I forgot to mention something in this scene. The song Merry and Pippin are singing while dancing on the table is derived from a song Pippin and Sam sing in the books too, but here they sing it after they leave Gildor and the elves in Woodhall, shortly before they meet Farmer Maggot, so later in the books. We come to these events next episode. The song also references one of Bilbo's favorite bath songs, sung in Crickhollow by Pippin while taking a bath and flooding the bathroom a bit. Again, one of many nice little book references which make the extended edition so great. Reading The Lord of the Rings again, it's quite remarkable how often people sing or recite poems which make the fictional cultures feel alive. There are also songs which have a special magical power or authority in the world of Tolkien, and even the words or commands of some entities can have power as well, as explained in my Nature of Magic video. Arda, the world itself, was once created out of the song of God and his, let's call them angels, in the so-called music of the Ainur. And even though the hobbits have no magical powers in them and are just the small people, a simple song still does something for them and other beings, like giving them joy or even courage, which is something we can all relate to. Tolkien weaves these ideas masterfully together and builds his world upon it. We will most likely talk about this in more detail next episode. However, I thought long about how to structure this video because the chronology and events from the beginning in the books are vastly different from what we see in the films. From Bilbo's party to Frodo leaving the Shire, it takes about 17 years. He is 50 years old when he leaves. So let me just sum up the events of the films very short that I hope you have in your mind. Then we go through what happens in the books in comparison and see how far we get. In the film, Gandalf leaves after Bilbo's party to do some research. Some undefined time later, Frodo comes back home from the Green Dragon Inn late in the evening and is surprised by a worried Gandalf, who asks if the ring is secret and safe. The books have a similar phrase. They make the final test in the fire and find out that it is really the One Ring. After that, Gandalf also explains a bit of lore behind the One Ring and that Sauron knows about the Shire and Baggins due to finding Gollum first. Sam is outside eavesdropping their dialogue but is caught by Gandalf. Parts of the dialogues are quite similar to the books. And now they already slowly leave the Shire, meeting the elves on their way and later Merry and Pippin at Farmer Maggot's farm, who chases them away from his property. On their further way, they hide and flee from the Nazgul until they finally escape by taking the Buckleberry ferry. Cut, they are in front of Bree. Some of these events are also mentioned or referenced in the books, even snippets of the dialogues, but there's just so much more happening around it there. We already talked about the Green Dragon Inn scene last episode, but we start at what happens shortly after Bilbo's birthday party. In the books, Frodo has to deal with all kinds of consequences of Bilbo suddenly vanishing and he becoming his heir. Bilbo had prepared presents for all his guests and Frodo had to hand them over. He also had to deal with the Sackville-Bagginses as hinted in the film during the birthday party. The feud between Bilbo and them was due to Bilbo's sudden return from his adventures in The Hobbit. In the Shire, people thought that Bilbo is dead and the Sackville-Bagginses would inherit Back End with this. They almost moved in, but then Bilbo returned and it felt like that Back End, which they greatly desired, was stolen from them. When Bilbo again disappeared later at his birthday party and Frodo became his heir, they weren't happy either and felt this disappointment again. For sure, this attitude seems a bit rough, and author Lobelia and her son LotR Sackville-Baggins were not very popular in the Shire too. According to letter 25, the Sackville family was among the wealthier families in the Shire, and Otho is the only heir, so they weren't in dire need. Tolkien revisits this topic close to the end of Return of the King. However, after Frodo dealt with them, Gandalf appears and they have a brief talk. Bilbo's magical ring is on their mind and he advises Frodo to keep it safe and secret, not using it. They also discuss Bilbo's story about how he got the ring, which is an interesting lore reference in the books in of itself. Originally, The Hobbit was not part of the Lord of the Rings universe, and Gollum bet his magical ring freely when he encounters Bilbo. The dangerous and corrupting concept of the One Ring did not exist yet. Tolkien changed that detail in the second edition of The Hobbit, while he worked on The Lord of the Rings, which was also planned as a sequel to The Hobbit, but also as part of Tolkien's mythology, which The Hobbit was originally not part of. Tolkien explains this change by making Bilbo lying about how he got the ring due to the influence of it in The Lord of the Rings, so Bilbo writes his made-up story into his Red Book. Considering that Tolkien's stories are written from the perspective of someone, or Tolkien to be precise, finding the Red Book and translating it into modern English, this is an incredible smart trick to explain the differences between The Hobbit's first edition from 1937 and its second edition from about 1951. It also shows how the One Ring has a very subtle impact on the mind of its bearer and implements it into his story, giving us an idea of how mythology is created. This is not really referenced in the movies though, at least as far as I know. After that conversation, Gandalf leaves for a long time. His next visit of Frodo will be 3 years later. In the meantime, the people of the Shire blame Gandalf for Bilbo's vanishing. It's days after the birthday party where people call him Disturber of Peace, which is referenced in the films, but there it is mentioned by Frodo before Bilbo's party. The next few years he visited Frodo frequently, being very interested in Frodo and his health. People noticed that the new Mr. Baggins of Back End does not seem to age, like Bilbo before. And then Gandalf was gone for over 9 years. What happens exactly during all these years or during his visit, the books do not tell. We know that he actively researched the lore of the Rings of Power and the One Ring, slowly catching up with Saruman's knowledge. Of course, he did not suspect him yet, even though he also never asked him for help too in all this time, which was a wise decision. Quote, "I might perhaps have consulted Saruman the White, but something always held me back." Saruman also actively tried to find the One Ring for his own. I explain the details of this in my video about the Istari. Gandalf, however, had a huge advantage here. He knew the hobbits and the story of Bilbo, including Gollum. While Saruman searched the Anduin for the One Ring for decades, Gandalf was a step ahead and searched for Gollum to piece the puzzle together. It becomes clear how important it is that Gollum, also a hobbit, finds the ring so that it can pass out of history, law and the gaze of the wise. And what fateful event that Bilbo, another hobbit, finds it next, taking it to the isolated Shire. Gandalf is the only person who knows about it and its lore. So in the meantime, Gandalf asks Aragorn and probably other allies among the elves, for example the Wood Elves of Thranduil, to help finding Gollum. He also explains all this to Frodo in the books after he returns the last time and they test the One Ring. This is partially quite similar in the films, but parts of this dialogue and lore details that the wizard explains are missing or moved to later scenes. For example, Frodo wishes that Bilbo had killed Gollum when he had the chance in this dialogue in the book. In the film, this scene was moved to the mines of Moria, where Frodo discovers that Gollum follows them. This dialogue, and especially Gandalf's answer, is also very important. Quote, "What a pity that Bilbo did not stab that vile creature when he had the chance. Pity? It was pity that stayed his hand, pity and mercy, not to strike without need, and he has been well rewarded, Frodo. Be sure that he took so little hurt from the evil and escaped in the end because he began his ownership of the ring so, with pity." Fate is very important in Tolkien's world, and the fact that Bilbo actually began his ownership with mercy and pity, in my opinion, formed the path of fate in a way that the ring could not become a curse for him. The ring test is also at places quite similar, but has several changes too. In the book, Gandalf waits until morning and daylight before telling Frodo more about the ring and making the final test. With this, it also makes sense that Sam is working outside. The films don't really explain why he suddenly eavesdrops at Frodo's window in the middle of the night. In the film, we see how Gandalf throws the envelope with the ring into the fire. At this time, in the books, Frodo already had it on a chain in his pocket. We discussed the envelope scene last episode. What must be noted, Frodo already had it for about 17 years at this point, and he even struggled a bit to hand it over to Gandalf for the test, but still manages to do so, and the wizard also touches it with his fingers in the books. The following scene in the films capture the next step quite well. Gandalf suddenly throws the ring into the fire, which surprises Frodo and even stresses him a bit. We find this in books and films. He probably does this to avoid discussion because, as mentioned, the ring already affected Frodo, but this becomes only clear in the books because in the movie Frodo had stored the ring in a chest and hadn't even opened the letter yet. The mention of it being quite cool and Gandalf using tongs is in the books too, but the result of the fine lines appearing happens almost instant when Frodo holds up the ring. The film of course had to use this moment to generate tension, which makes totally sense for the medium film. The actors also do an amazing job acting this scene. The following dialogues are again partially similar to the books, however Gandalf goes into much detail, also reciting all verses of the ring poem in the books. He even explains the story of Gollum relatively detailed. As mentioned, he had found Gollum in the meantime. It's quite interesting how good old Gollum learned where Bilbo lives. He only knew his full name after he met him. Gandalf explains that Gollum at some point found the strength to leave his cave and wandered to the east following Bilbo's trail of his adventures, even as far as the streets of Dale, where he spied and listened to conversations in secret. Bilbo was a hero there, and he made his return home no secret. With this, Gollum learned that Bilbo was from the Shire. He then tried to go there, but around Mirkwood, when Sauron bent all his power and will to summon the ring and all evil to Mordor, Gollum went there too, around 3rd Age 3009. Gandalf confesses a mistake here. The Wood Elf followed Gollum's trail but lost it, and he went south, and Gandalf let the matter be. With this, Gollum wandered through Mordor and was captured by Sauron's servants relatively late in his journey. He was tormented and revealed to Sauron all he knew, including Baggins and Shire. We see this scene in the films too, and have a small look at Mordor. Sauron then sets Gollum free again. 3rd Age 3017, probably because he could be still useful to him. Then poor Gollum left Mordor, but was captured right again by Aragorn in the Dead Marshes, and brought to Thranduil's realm. Here Gandalf learned many puzzle pieces and pieced them together so that he could explain all that to Frodo and the reader. It will later be explained again in more detail during the Council of Elrond, but this is a topic for a future video. Thank you for watching. Sadly, I have to end the video here. I actually wanted to get as far as Frodo moving to Crickhollow in this episode, but good news, I plan to release the next episode very soon, probably next weekend. The only thing that could change this is probably news from the Lord of the Rings Amazon series or a mind-blowing E3. The reason why I end this early is that I was away for 4 days last week and couldn't work on any videos, as mentioned on Twitter. To improve my release schedule, I decided to make this video a bit shorter. Actually also intended this series to be flexible in length, so it should be okay. I hope you enjoyed it. Sorry if it feels a bit incomplete or rushed. If you still liked it, please consider pressing the like button, leave a comment or subscribe and press the annoying bell if you want to get notified when I upload a video. You can also post lore questions if you want. Next episode will be about Sam getting caught eavesdropping and if Gandalf is able to turn him into a toad. Also Frodo selling back end to Lobelia Sackville-Baggins and moving to a new house in Crickhollow. And if this sounds strange to you, yes, it's a part in the book that is very different in the films. It will be interesting. Keep the part about the concept of songs in Tolkien's world in mind for the next few episodes. As hinted before, I will also cover E3 a bit on this channel, in case you like my gaming content. Again, thank you for watching and goodbye.